All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Beat the Cult podcast, where we fight harmful cult like religious thinking and practices. My name is Nikki, and I am joined here today by Arden Hart. Hi,
Hey,
Arden. I am
hi.
so lucky to have her on. I'm excited. So, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you so much, Arden, for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. And I just wanted to ask you to please introduce yourself to us, tell us your story, kind of how you got into the atheist community, or just give a little rundown of who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Arden Hart. I've done some work with the atheism online stuff for the past few years. I did some work with the ACA for a while, and now I do all my work with the Line, where we do a call-in show about trans rights. So we take any questions about trans-related issues, from like I don't think trans people exist to like how do I come out to my sister or whatever. We do the full spectrum of trans-related issues. Yeah, and that's kind of the core of my stuff. I like doing atheist activism and trans rights activism. I think I've maybe stepped away from the atheist activism a little bit because it's like in the online space, it's very like philosophical and like that's not my niche. So I just like to talk about banging the drums of like violations of the wall between religion and government and stuff like that. Signal
Sure.
boost that stuff when I see it, and yeah.
Sure. Okay. So you're doing some more like trans activism at this point, which is greatly needed, especially in the United States and especially where we live in the South.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Yeah, I kind of got into that because like even in the atheist community, I mean, which is kind of, I think we're getting there. It's there's such a huge portion of people who have very um uninformed opinions on trans rights issues, like Richard Dawkins, for example, that really stand in opposition to all the relevant experts. So yeah, it's
That's interesting. I actually had a question I wanted to ask you about the atheist community's relationship with the trans community.
mm,
Well, you're you're really active in both of these communities. How is that relationship, I guess, going in your opinion?
yeah. So it's interesting. I think in some ways, I would say I've gotten more respect from the atheist community than I've gotten from a lot of other spaces. Because I think there
Of
are a
course.
lot of people here who are really about humanism. They want to see everyone who's not hurting other people thrive and live their best life.
Right.
But at the same time, I think there's a lot of people who I don't know exactly where it's rooted in. I think part of it is uh, American culture is very like rooted in Christianity, and there's a
Right.
lot of anti-trans ideas and like our media and stuff.
Right.
Um, so there are a lot of intellectual people, or who would otherwise, I think, be skeptical, critical thinkers who have a lot of just really toxic, uninformed ideas about trans rights, and that's kind of what really spurred my friend Katie Montgomery and I to
Mm.
really start doing the transatlantic show. Because when you're seeing Richard Dawkins or like maybe Sam Harris doesn't quite have the bad opinions on trans rights, but some of the people
Oh,
he's associated with or hanging out with have really terrible opinions, and it's like, okay, so this massive portion of like atheist viewers, right, people who consume atheist content, are
right.
propagating these really harmful ideas that really negatively impact the lives of trans people. And not because they're like protecting, they might say they're protecting kids, but when you really look at the data, that doesn't seem to be what's happening. So
Right.
yeah.
So what I didn't hear about Dawkins is commenting on this. What did he say?
Mm.
Or
Right. So Dawkins, it's been a series of things. I think he's kind of strayed away from talking about it at all more recently, but
okay.
it was a year or so ago. He had made some comment saying, if you can identify as a woman, if a man can identify as a woman, then what was wrong with like Rachel Dolezal with like a white person identifying as a black person? And so yeah, that was in my
It's very
opinion.
weird.
So it might help the audience. The way I define transphobia, right, would be beliefs or actions that are rooted in an irrational prejudice towards trans people.
Right.
I think that's pretty effective because we're talking that encompasses things like this that are clearly Dawkins perpetrating uninformed, harmful ideas that
Right.
further marginalize trans people, as well as maybe more directly like overt transphobic reactions or
Right.
actions. But then he also went on to recommend to his massive audience, as a science educator, this book called Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, which
Oh
cites
no.
an extremely poor study whose sample was collected from, I believe it was either Mumsnet or a different website, who's pretty much the only people who go to this website. It's a forum for parents of trans kids who
Mm,
don't support trans rights, who
right.
they sort of manifested this idea of something called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is the notion
Rapid
that,
onset.
yes,
Really?
it's the notion that a kid did not display gender dysphoric behavior or feelings before the age of like 12 or 13, and that
Mm.
it was induced in them by their peer group.
Oh, so it's like peer pressure, not an actual dysphoria, is what I'm assuming. You mean?
Right. That's
Okay.
what the study purports to demonstrate, but their sample
Mm,
sizes, or their sample, is so incredibly biased that the fact that
mm,
someone like Richard Dawkins would push that forward, I found pretty problematic. And actually, Matt and I did a show on the Hang Up about a year ago talking about this, that like if you're going to position yourself as a science communicator, I think you probably have some responsibility to be aware of the sources that you're pushing towards your audience. And if you do push a bad source, it's not the end of the world. You just have to say, hey, turns out this data is bad for reasons X, Y, and Z.
right.
And I retract my statement, or something along those lines.
Right.
But Dawkins has kind of just doubled down in the people are mad at me and I don't care sort of response. So,
As is his want,
yeah.
unfortunately. But
Mm-hmm.
he needs to recognize that he's greatly affecting people's perspectives just because of
Oh,
his
yeah.
influence. Um, what? So tell me more about the rapid onset gender dysphoria. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, so yeah, this came from I'm trying to think of the name of the author of the study. Lisa Littman
Lisa
conducted this
Littman.
study.
Oh.
And yeah, the sample was collected from an online forum of just moms who already had like a transphobic bias, who
Mm.
were venting to each other about the fact that their kids are trans. Um,
Oh.
so this was, yeah, where the sample for this study came from, of people who were saying, oh, well, I didn't see any signs of my kid being trans up till this point. And then their kids might cut them out or things like this, and they'll say like, oh, this is evidence that they have rapid onset gender dysphoria, when I think pretty much anyone who's grown up queer could tell you queer kids are pretty good at learning how to hide their queerness and hide their feelings
Exactly.
from potentially disapproving parents.
Yeah.
And we often have to cut out those parents because they are hateful and disapproving of who we are. So
Right.
it's kind of like this self-reinforcing delusion. But yeah, it's unfortunately become a very popular talking point. I mean, Candace Owens, who's a very popular far right
Oh boy.
person, has talked to Abigail Schreier. Joe
What
Rogan's had
is
Abigail Schreier on his podcast.
really? So,
Yeah.
oh crap! Sorry, I dropped my. So Joe Rogan and Candace. So is Joe Rogan? And I need to get. Is Joe Rogan far? Is he right, or is because I've seen him interview like Chappelle, Shapiro, Owens, like a kind of a balance. What is his?
I,
Like,
I think he's very centrist. He's kind of got that libertarian mindset of like,
okay,
if you're
okay,
not beating someone in the streets, it's probably fine, whatever you're doing.
okay.
Uh, I
I kind of
don't,
figured
I,
that.
I don't know his politics for real. I'm kind of just joking on like libertarian thought in general, but like,
Okay,
I get the
okay,
impression he's a libertarian. I think I
okay.
have seen him stand up to some bits of misinformation about trans rights. Like, Matt Walsh was on his podcast recently and suggesting that
Oh,
like I think he said something like tens of thousands of kids are on puberty blockers, and he was like, that doesn't sound right, and it's not. It's like less
it's
than
not
100 kids, or like 100 some odd kids are on puberty blockers.
right.
Whereas uh but then he also had oh, who was it? It was somebody who said the word cisgender, and he was like, oh, we're not going to use that here, because suggesting that it's problematic to use the word cisgender, which to me is just like, language is always developing. Cisgender does not suggest that you are a other. It just means you're not trans.
Right.
It's a shorthand for saying not trans without having to use those extra syllables.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, but this okay, so the rapid onset gender dysphoria was it an actual study that was done? Because I feel like if you're starting the study with a sample that's already biased towards a particular outcome, that it's not legitimate.
Yeah, so it did get published. I don't remember the journal that it got published in, but after the complaints were lodged about the methodology of the study, the journal actually retracted the study and
Oh
said
my
that they don't
gosh.
think it's legitimate anymore. But it's still in Abigail Schreier's book. It's still touted by Dawkins and Candace Owens and Joe Rogan, this book, as if it has valid information,
Oh
despite
my
the fact
God.
that the study was retracted by the publisher. So it's one of those things where it's like, I wish people would be a little bit more skeptical. And I think it's also worth mentioning that, there's about there's probably 3 studies that you hear people like this cite regularly to sort of attack trans rights.
Mm-hmm.
And there's good reason to be critical of all of them. But there are many, many, many studies that inform the medical consensus that transition is good for trans people. And even if you have one study that recommends maybe there's a new dimension that we're not being aware of, that is in
Right.
no way, they act as though it overturns, any interest in providing trans healthcare to trans people. But one
Hmm.
study is not going to overturn an academic, a consensus.
Okay.
Typically.
So what is so so this is a topic I'm a little bit new to. Being in Georgia, where everything is so southern and so Christian,
Mm-hmm.
um, there's not a lot of, I guess, outward expression or safety. I feel like trans individuals don't feel safe. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't really go out that much,
Me
as
neither.
much as I'd like. Right, it's probably a good idea. But and being in the LGBTQIA community, I feel like I would have more, I guess, access to individuals who were trans, but I don't know as many, and I wish I did because the stories are always, portrayed in the news as being extreme to one end or the other, like without much, I guess, validity from both sides. Both people seem untrust both sides. I'm sorry, not the trans community, but like very extreme representatives. I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
say that.
No, I get what you're touching on. I think the media does have a tendency to reach for the most extreme examples because it's the easiest for people to swallow. Like, I think a good example of like that on the pro trans side is Jazz Jennings. She's someone who
Hmm.
from 3 years old was stomping her feet and
Oh,
demanding her parents call her a girl and
the
wearing girls'
show.
clothes. Yep,
She
I
has
am
a show.
Jazz. She had a show. Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's a great example of how the media will often use those, say, you either have somebody who has a beard and is calling themselves a woman, and that's gross and wrong, or
Oh,
you have someone
yes.
who is Jazz Jennings and they're valid because they knew from the time they popped out of their mama that they were like just in the wrong body. And
Right.
it's like that's not the reality that most queer people live in. Like we grew up in this
Hmm.
society, and I think most kids are pretty keen on honing in on what things are wrong and what things are okay,
Right.
and learn how to hide certain behaviors or express them according to what's like acceptable in that time.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely
Okay.
see what you're saying. I think the media does have a problem with accurately representing the trans experience.
Agreed. And with that being said, what is your story? When did you begin to transition? At what age did you kind of start realizing there was like an incongruence with how society expected you to behave and what was
Mm.
actually, how what made sense to you? I'll say.
Yeah, so I think I definitely have very, very early memories of things being wrong for sure. Like,
Hmm. What do you mean by wrong, quote unquote?
yeah, so like for example, like one of the earliest memories I have of sort of some gender stuff was at my old Christian school I used to go to. I went to a private Christian school from
Oh,
K to
I
8th
did
grade.
too. Ah, yeah.
We had a Christmas holiday event that we called Red and Green Day. And
Hmm.
my cousin, who, before I was in school, treated me like a play doll. She would dress me up and do all this sort of stuff growing up. And
Oh,
that was okay when people didn't see. But
right.
on Red and Green Day, she wanted to paint my nails for me. So she did. And I got reprimanded by my teacher for doing that. I got reprimanded
Oh.
also by my father for the way I showed my nail polish, because I went like this in the photo, and he
Oh.
was like, men don't do that. Men look at their nails like this.
Get that
So
dirt from under your nails.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
those are probably some of my earliest memories. I remember wanting to grow my hair really long in like second grade and being forced to cut it because boys weren't allowed to have hair below like their ears or something like that in our
Right.
school. I think for me, it's kind of hard to know because like the way I've described it is that like I knew when they said boys on this side and girls on this side, which side I was supposed to
Mm,
go on.
hmm.
But I don't think it really sank into me that that meant that I was going to grow up to be a man until I was
Mm.
closer to like 10 or 11
Okay.
was kind of when it started to click into me that like, oh, the girls in my class are like starting to grow breasts and they're like
Mm.
allowed to
Puberty.
wear the right, they're going into women and I'm growing in this direction. And like that was kind of what
Right.
started to set off alarm bells in my head. And I was like,
Oh, okay.
oh, something's super wrong. And of course, I had seen the stuff that other people did, you know, like Jerry Springer and like a
Oh,
60-minute
yeah.
special here and there about a
Yeah.
man who became a woman or something.
Right.
So the idea did exist in my head that it was possible to do something like that. But I think I was very fortunate to be a kid of like the internet age, you know, where the internet was
Mm.
becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And I think at some point around like 11 or 12, being left alone with the computer, I was able to figure out, oh, people can, it's not just like a man became a woman one day, like people transition. And
Mm.
I think it was, I think I was 14 already. It was like right before my freshman year of high school, that I came out to my mom and told her
Oh.
I think I'm a girl. And my mama, bless her heart, she did
I
not
hear that
know.
southern,
Yeah,
that southern girl. I'm with you.
she 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 didn't know what to do, right? Because I mean that
Yeah.
that back then, this is like 2010, 2009, was like a unheard of thing pretty much, like aside from those 60-minute specials or whatever.
Right.
So she took me to a therapist and to like a school counselor, and
Oh, that's
luckily
good. At
they
least she
set
didn't
me
just
on
try
the
to
right track.
pray for you. I mean,
Yeah,
because that's what my parents would have done. Said, that's a demon. We're praying for you.
right. I mean, well,
Yeah.
interestingly enough, I we had a very tight church family at the time, and
Oh,
they pretty much kicked my parents out of church, because they told my mom
really?
she was being a bad mother for letting me transition. And all my friends
Wow.
from I had been at private Christian school up until like the end of junior high. Pretty much all of my friends in the community there stopped talking to me for a while.
Oh my
Um,
God. But
so,
you had your mother's support, though. She
but
allowed
I
you to be who
did.
you. Wow.
Yeah, my mom
Go,
was
mom.
amazing. She
She's
really
a
was a trooper.
badass.
And
Yeah.
my stepdad was great too. I got to give him credit
Wow.
because my mom and him had been married for like I think a year, maybe two at that time, and he was more of a dad than my actual dad ever could have been throughout all of that. He was
Right.
incredible. So
Oh
I
my
was really
gosh.
lucky that in the town I grew up in, of all the parents I could have had, I got the ones I
Mhm.
did. I was really lucky about that. But
Yeah.
didn't make it much easier.
I
uh
was gonna say, what were some of the like the church was rejecting the family. You said you had
yeah.
some friends. What were some of those? I mean, besides those challenges, was it like a really small town or?
Yes, an incredibly small
Oh,
town. So I grew up in
oh,
the one of the northernmost towns in Vermont. There was like 2,000 people in like my hometown.
okay. Oh,
Extremely
that's very
tiny.
small.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a middle of nowhere town. So about I think my freshman year of high school, I was taking hormones, but still having everyone call me a boy, and then I was kind of
Mm.
planning to take my sophomore year of high school homeschooled to kind of transition and then come back my junior year and be like, I'm good.
Hey. Yeah.
But my parents said they would let me be homeschooled, but only if I took some extracurriculars at the school so I didn't like isolate myself. And
Sure. That's healthy. Wow.
It was a good
Your parents are
idea.
impressive.
It was a good idea, but it really didn't turn out well because
Oh, no.
my peers at school were pretty hostile.
Oh, okay.
I eventually it calmed down, but initially the response was, I can't believe I didn't get my ass like to completely beat in school, to be honest, because I got like death threats pretty much every day for a solid chunk of time.
Oh my God.
Left on like my phone with voicemail and like throughout the hallways and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh. How did you handle that?
I don't know if I did. uh I think at the time, I think my response was like kind of catatonic. I just kind of shut down and didn't
Hmm.
didn't really try to give them any response. I didn't know how to respond because I was also a tiny little kid. So like what could have I have done against any of them? Probably nothing. Like I was just
Sure.
the easy target, I think, for a lot of them.
Sure.
And
That's
on
still not
top of
fair, though.
losing my relationship with like my dad, we've kind of worked to build it back up, but it pretty much, we were very close before I transitioned, and after I came out, it just completely kind of fell through.
Oh
Um,
no. What was his perspective? Like, how did, I mean, I know he didn't approve, but based on what did he not? What was his reasons for not approving, pretty much?
well, I think there's the reasons he would have stated, and then there's the reasons over a decade of dealing with this relationship that I've theorized are probably more likely. Um,
Okay.
I think he wasn't convinced I was trans, I think was what it was, because I
Hmm.
think I think he read the books about people like Jazz Jennings, and he was like, "Well, you weren't demanding to be put into a dress, when you were
Hmm.
little, and so it must be that you are not trans." And he was very convinced it was a phase for a while. He disclosed to me some things that happened in his life. Then he was like,
Oh.
"And that didn't affect me, so why should this affect you?" And
Oh.
I was like, it was hard for me to know what to do. When your dad is telling you it must be a phase, you must be wrong about who you are, it's kind of hard to
Hmm.
not like let that dig in deep into your psyche and kind of internalize it.
Right.
And it kind of culminated to where I don't know how much of my story you've heard before, but around 17, I decided that I was going to detransition.
Oh, okay. Tell
Yeah,
me, I did not know that actually. That's very interesting because I actually wanted to ask you about how many stories or how common that actually is in the trans
yeah.
community.
So actually, there's some good data on this from one of the largest current studies ever conducted on trans people within the US. And that study is getting updated like right now. I think they just finished taking in surveys. And so they're compiling the data to release a
Oh,
new report, which is really exciting. But
yeah, that is exciting.
yeah, so it's actually about 6%, I think, of people who um, express an interest in transition um, change their mind at some point.
Hmm.
And of that number, I think it was like 60 some odd percent end up transitioning at a later point in life and cite that the reasoning was due to bullying or rejection from a spouse or their like religious
Oh,
community
spouse.
or
Yes.
employment. Those are like the more common reasons that people detransitioned. And
Sure.
only I think it was 0.2% in this study of the representative sample uh detransitioned because transition was not right for them because they discovered they weren't trans. You'll see
Huh.
some ranges in the data of from like 0.2 to 2%, but that number is pretty consistent. I think there's been like 4 or 5 studies on that, and it's pretty much the same every time. So
Okay.
it's fairly common, about like 5 to 6% that people will detransition. Pretty rare that they'll detransition and then stay detransitioned and it just wasn't right for them. Most of the time, it's something similar to what I went through:
Okay.
harassment, bullying issues in
Sure.
life, and then transitioning later in life when it's more accessible.
Sure.
Um,
So detransitioning isn't a finalized stage. You can detransition several times, potentially.
yeah. So there've been some kind of community efforts to like develop this language better because, especially with trans issues in common parlance, the language is changing a lot because I think we're understanding more rapidly and having a lot of conversations about it because it's such a hot button topic right now across all of the media.
That's true.
People have been talking about thinking of it more like a non-linear transition.
Okay.
Because it's
That
also
makes
really
sense.
common for the people who detransition to not say like, I was assigned male at birth, I transitioned to be a woman, and then okay, I'm back to a man. A lot of the people who detransition will say either I'm non-binary or like I don't give a fuck what you say my gender. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that here.
Oh, you can
Uh,
say what you want. No, it's fine.
okay. They'll be like, I don't give a fuck what you call me. I'm just me. I don't
Right.
want to have to pick a box. I'm just me. That's I think a more common thing you're going to hear from a lot of detransitioners.
Good.
Um, not all. I don't represent detransitioners as a whole. There are definitely some who detransition and say they're back to their sex assigned at birth or whatever. That's totally cool too. But yeah, it's kind of I've seen some efforts to try to develop that language a little bit to represent more of the reality of what that experience is like. And
Sure.
I think for me, I really like nonlinear transition. I think it's a
Mm,
accurate way to think about it, but it is a little bit of a mouthful. So, probably something more a little succinct might catch on faster.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned sex assigned at birth.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same as gender assigned at birth? Because chromosomally, of course, a person is XXXY, or sometimes they may be intersex, um, with a variation of those two options. But is there a difference between sex and gender in the trans community, or how is that kind of explained?
Yeah. So this kind of line of thought is continuously evolving. In my time being out as a trans person, like over a decade, I've seen it go back and forth like multiple times.
Mm,
I think it's probably fair to say that gender and sex are distinct, in that I think gender seems to be a more of a psychological state, like
sure,
handedness or like sexuality. It's not,
sure.
you can't pinpoint a place in the brain, but
Right.
it does seem to be a psychological experience of like being a human in society, right?
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense. Yeah,
Sort of a relational thing.
sure.
And there are definitely, when we're talking about sex, uh, like a bimodal distribution, like there's a concentration of primarily 2 points that seem to be
Sure.
defined by physical characteristics.
Sure.
um, I think there is also development of some people who would rather not acknowledge a distinction between gender and sex,
Mm.
with the thought in mind that most of us don't know what our chromosomal alignment is, right? And the
Oh, I thought
other,
it. Oh,
well, sure. It's like a 99% chance that based on your genitals, they're going to be, X, Y, or XX. That's true.
okay, good.
But
Okay, I was like, Arden, don't tell me something that's going to blow my mind. No,
but it
no,
is.
tell me if it's true. Tell me. But I
Yeah,
was
but
sorry.
chromosomal differences are actually more common than people think. I mean, Klinefelter syndrome, and a
No,
male
I've
born
heard of
with
that.
Klinefelter syndrome can go
Mhm.
their whole life and not even know that they are technically intersex, even though they have
Mm.
XXY chromosomes.
Yes. Oh,
And
that's interesting. Yeah.
the other factors that are really more prevalent when we're talking about sex, when a doctor is talking about someone's sex, they're almost never talking about their chromosomes. They're usually talking about their secondary sex characteristics or their
Sure.
primary sex characteristics or their
Sure.
hormone levels and things like this. And
Right.
all of those things are subject to change. You can
Right.
get bottom surgery or top surgery, you
Mm.
can take hormones. So there are some people who prefer to think of it as just that sex is more mutable than we give it credit for, and that in fact they have become female or become male. I don't
Interesting.
know if I really fall solidly in one camp or another. I think there are good arguments for both. Um, I definitely agree that, like, as of right now, you can't change your sex chromosomes. But
Sure. That would be interesting. Oh.
uh, I was growing breasts before I ever took hormones, so I don't know what my chromosomes are. I could have
Mm.
been XXY for all I know. But it's like so irrelevant to me, the chromosome part, that it's hard for me to even really consider that when we're talking about sex. Um,
Oh,
but it does matter
interesting.
to some people. Some trans people will really cling to I'm a biological male and I have transitioned to be a woman. I think the conversation hasn't really landed, at least within the trans community, and like one is like more appropriate to talk about, like politically speaking.
Mm.
And as far as like the science goes, I think that the mutability of sex is still kind of something that's heavily discussed, and
Mm,
a lot of the people that I know are talking about it more in the mutability sense, where most sex characteristics that we associate with sex are subject to change, if somebody wants them to
sure,
be. So
sure.
I don't know. I try to not fault anyone. I think, just kind of say what you're thinking, and we'll navigate to the concept behind it. But that's easier to say when I'm engaging in these spaces where we're having these conversations all the time. I think it's probably good to assume when you're in conversation with a trans person, just in general, you're at a bar or at a queer event or something, to probably just assume that, like, talking about their sex is probably just, let's not even open that door. We don't really need to. It's not useful for anything.
No, I would never. Oh no, no, I would
Yeah.
not. Um, I would not broach the topic with another, just someone just out and about, but just, being on the podcast, I want to ask
Mm.
these questions.
Yeah,
I hope
absolutely.
I'm not overstepping any bounds.
Nah, I got no boundaries anymore. I've been doing this stuff for too long.
Okay. Okay. And okay, so along those lines, talking about, of course, the chromosomes, which aren't necessarily as central to the conversation as I originally, I guess, assumed. What is kind of your perspective on, and I guess this could go back to maybe how early a person started their hormonal treatments or didn't, but
Mhm.
like sexual dimorphism, the variation in morphology between males and females, and maybe how that contributes to maybe their physical abilities. I guess
Mm.
maybe more so in the area of sports. How do you feel kind of about that? Like maybe the participation in combat sports? I'm sure you've heard this
Yeah.
topic a
So
lot.
my understanding is that for trans women who have gone through a, like, male puberty, a testosterone puberty,
Sure.
even those who have been on hormone replacement therapy for a consistent time, there's, I think, like, two domains of sport where they maintain what could be considered a, and this is average, this does not apply to every trans person, but
Oh, sure.
on average, they might maintain a statistical advantage. And I think that has to do with either, like, running or swimming or something like that. It's one of the two or both. There may be, I know it's running is one of them, and there's another one that I don't know if I'm remembering correctly. And that may change because I think there's a lot of research going on about this stuff, like,
Sure.
every
Oh,
day
yeah.
right
Yeah.
now. I have seen studies that also seem to suggest that both trans men and trans women, even pre-hormone treatment, do not align with their cis counterparts in terms of athletic performance. So it's
Interesting.
really, really common in these conversations for people to say, oh, well, males on average perform like this, and
Hmm.
females on average perform like this.
Right.
Therefore, trans women probably shouldn't be allowed to compete with women here because males compete like this. But what we actually see is that trans women don't seem to be a representative, like, of the cis male population in athletic performance. So
Okay.
it's a little bit of a flawed starting point when people try to engage this conversation with the thought that trans women, because we're assigned male at birth, are going to perform the same as cis men. Um,
Hmm.
and we don't
Okay.
really know what the mechanism for that is. It could be like a sociological thing, like trans women
Hmm.
who are in the closet, maybe not engaging in physical sports as much because of this sort of prejudice. It's really hard to
Hmm.
know exactly what that is, but that does seem
Interesting.
to be borne out in the data, which is fascinating. But I think this dimension of the conversation is unfortunately relatively understudied. I think there are some. There's a good video if you're into watching
Sure.
YouTube for your information. Jangles the Science Lad is the
Angles the
channel.
Science Lab. Cool.
He had I think he's like a kinesiologist or something. He did sports medicine stuff in school, and he did
Okay.
a whole video on comparing the relevant studies on uh, athletic performance in trans people. It's really interesting.
Okay.
I don't think it solidly falls in, like, the in one camp or another, but what I my all of that is to lead up to, like, my overarching perception on this is that some trans women who have gone through male puberty may retain an advantage in certain domains of athletic performance.
Okay.
But because that is not consistent, I think it would be extremely unethical to then go and say, therefore, we need to ban trans women from competing in sports with women. Because I can tell you, I'm not an athletic individual. I have never been an athletic individual in my life. And if someone thinks I have an advantage over them, I guarantee you put me in any domain of sport against pretty much any cis woman, and I guarantee you I'll get my ass kicked. I like struggle to open bags of chips and shit. Like, it's like we have like this perception that like trans women are like these like hulking men who can like open stuff, and
right.
They might cite like Fallon Fox, right? She was in that I don't know what fighting organization she did
MMA?
work with, MMA maybe. And her opponent got like an orbital skull fracture, and everyone likes to go, "Oh, she bashed her skull in," right?
Yes,
and
I heard about that.
Now I'm about to cite something that I haven't actually looked into, so fact check me, please, if I'm wrong. Sure. I've heard from her that is the most common injury in the sport.
Okay.
So to suggest that she, her unique physical advantage allowed her to commit this extremely, heinous level of harm to the cis woman because of the despairing advantage that she had. Right. It's just not the case. That's not what we actually see.
Okay, good. That's why I wanted to ask you directly, because even going back to the rates of detransitioning, certain parties, especially on the right, will make it seem like this is occurring at a much higher frequency than it actually is. And when I hear these stories, such as the MMA fighter, I was told her skull was bashed in and the person was considerably stronger, and there's no way to ensure that cisgender women are safe, especially in combat sports. And I'm thinking I need to speak to someone who has an unbiased and actually directly involved perspective, because it's always exaggerated, it seems, these stories.
Yeah, I mean, and this happened with like Leah Thomas, the swimmer too. She won a competition,
that was the name,
and everyone said, everyone was like, "Oh, see, she won this because she's a man. She wins." But then you follow her competition to it was the next level of competition, and she lost. Well, she didn't lose
to cis or cisgender
to cis women. So
okay.
I think a lot of this is rooted in a conservative, misogynistic power fantasy where men are the big, strong providers, and women can never be as big and strong and as important as men. And so since trans women are men to them, it's this like they've taken the story that they tell themselves about their gender roles and like extrapolated it into like some sort of biological essentialist argument that they're trying to apply to trans people. And I definitely encourage people to, keep reading about this stuff and, not from sources like Joe Rogan. Like if you know how to read, I'm sure there's videos on YouTube that can teach you how to read a study to learn if it's a good study or not. I would encourage you to do that sort of thing because
that's a great idea.
I think you're going to
encourage people to do that. How to read a study. I just tell them to read them.
Yeah, I think it's not a how-to resource, but if you go on Google and type in a comprehensive defense of trans people in Reddit, you're going to get a Reddit thread that has compiled like pretty much every study ever conducted on trans people. And not all of them are amazing. I think all of them probably have some valid information that's probably worth reading and drawing from. But it's a really awesome I think it's probably out of date. There's been a lot of studies that have come up since then, but it's worth looking at and following up on all the information I'm giving you, because I'm not a sports person in any sense of the word. So I'm a queer person through my bones. I don't do sports.
I understand.
So I'm just communicating the things that I've learned as being like a trans activist and representative. People ask these questions a lot, so I've had to do the research. I've had to follow this stuff up, And it's
Right.
definitely not the area I'm most comfortable in. Definitely like the efficacy of transition and like regret
Sure.
rates and stuff like that is a little bit more my ball game. But
Sure.
um, yeah, I have read a little bit into this stuff, and I think it's important that other people probably look into it too, because everyone's got an agenda on this. And it's
Right. And the stories are in the news. People are seeing these things, but they're not doing the necessary research to really understand what's happening.
right. I mean, the same thing that happened to Leah Thomas happened to that one case of the like the high school runner athlete who she won a competition at her school. I believe there was like even a lawsuit potentially involved on from
Sounds
one of the
familiar.
yeah, and then they followed up the next level of competition and she didn't win. Like this notion that because, trans women are men in their eyes, that they're just always going to
Yeah.
win is not
Right.
true. And I think, I even think that if you let cis men compete with women, I think women would still win a portion of the time. And oh man, I can't wait for the day that something like that happens, because they all need to get their ego checked on these things. Because this
They
idea that
do.
just, men are winning everything is just a male power fantasy delusion that's not like born in reality.
Actually, along those lines, what do you feel about, or did you hear, I guess, Serena Williams's perspective on this? Like, if she was competing in male sports, well, she said, "I'm glad I'm not competing in male sports because I would get my ass kicked, basically,
Mm-hmm.
because they're bigger, stronger, like in the tennis realm." Do you think? Well, what do you think about that? Do you think it's because it's professional sports, or how do you feel about her perspective?
Yeah, I have heard her say that. She said something along the lines of like it's a whole different sport or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, she
And,
did.
and that may be. I don't know how tennis works at all, and how performance is in tennis. That's one study I have not read.
Same.
Um, but she may be right. It may be a totally different sport. I still think it would be wrong to ban trans women from competing with women. I think it may be the case that individuals might demonstrate a statistically significant advantage such that it would not be fair for them to compete in a certain group. But
Ah,
I think that
that's a
might,
good, yeah, that
but I
makes
think if
sense.
we're thinking about that, I think that would also apply to some cis women. Um,
That's
like a
true.
great example is Caster Semenya. And some people might
You
debate whether or
said the
not.
name in my head. I was picturing her. I'm like, who is this person? And you just said it. So yes, Caster Semenya.
I think some people might debate whether or not she's a cis woman, because as I believe I don't know exactly what condition she has, but I believe she has an intersex condition or a
Mm,
DSD or whatever the appropriate term is for someone who's
mm,
intersex. Um, but I think, but all standards, people would consider her a cis woman. She was born a woman. She's lived as a woman her whole life.
right.
Um, at most, she maybe has a slightly higher testosterone level, but that can happen in cis women who are not intersex.
That's
That
true.
could impact their athletic performance.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
it's to suggest that trans women are uniquely advantaged is the claim that they need to demonstrate to justify banning trans women as a group from athletic performance, in my view.
Mm,
And I think that is just a burden of proof that they have not met. Um,
sure.
but yeah, again, I think there may well be people who have an advantage that we can say like, hey, it might be unfair for you to compete in this group, which is why maybe
Mm,
developing our standards of how we divide athletes might be more valuable. I don't know what the
mm.
outcome is because I'm not a sports person, but I think there could be, in collaboration with trans activists and people who actually know sports shit, a ethical and fair way to approach these.
I love that. People who know sports shit. I'm a sports fanatic. Yeah, but I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just so not plugged in. I like I'll even go on like a little rant about why I think football is problematic, and from like a
Oh,
feminist perspective
it
all the time
is.
from time to time.
I love it though. I was that's one of those things I'll chalk up to being that's like the one of the two things my dad and I like agree on and
Yeah.
enjoy together. So, and I'm a huge football fan and I know it's like horrible, but it's like tradition and I kind of love it.
Yeah.
So,
No, I get it. There's lots of people who do, and I'm by no means like calling to ban football or whatever, but
oh,
yeah.
that would
I
be an uphill battle in America.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I would never win that fight. But yeah, I think there could be a collaboration that could really be meaningful for uh, trans athletes and for equality amongst all athletes.
Sure.
But I don't really see that conversation being had. I think people are starving for a reason to ban trans people. I know the like professional disc golfing group just like last week.
Disc golfing.
Yes,
Professional?
there is a I know there believe it or not, there's a professional group for just about everything.
I can believe that
They released
actually.
some standards of saying that they're banning trans women from competing in the women's leagues because of, and they cited Abigail Schreier's book, which is just
Oh my
funny
gosh.
because it's not an academic article at all, but that was a citation within their reasoning. I get what the impetus is, right? I think if I'm being charitable, because I don't know if I actually think that these people care about women's rights at all, but if I'm
No.
being charitable, women's sports were created to give women a chance to fairly compete and be recognized and get all the
Mhm.
accolades within all of these sports that men have had for centuries and millennia. That's
Exactly.
awesome. I love that, and that should absolutely exist.
Yeah.
Um,
As someone who played sports all the way up through high school, I wish I had played in college, but sports was very important to me. And like playing basketball, traveling and competing and winning. And it would have been very hard to do that against the boys.
right,
Kind of
right.
big and
And
yeah.
I think it's really unfortunate because, like, it's so something that you see trans people struggling with a lot is like we were talking about, the reason a lot of people detransition is because they're not getting
Mm,
acceptance from their community. When we're
right.
looking at what is leading to good outcomes for trans people,
Right.
support from their employers, religious leaders, and community members are like some of
Mm,
the most statistically significant factors in in the well-being of their transition, in the success of their transition for them mentally.
of
And
course.
if they don't have a demonstrable advantage, that individual, and you're banning them from maybe one of the most significant places that they're getting access to community, that just
Right.
seems so unnecessarily cruel, baselessly cruel in my view.
Right. We
um
agree.
yeah.
That's I yeah, that's interesting. I feel like it's of course similar with the homosexual community. At least for me, I can speak about that. Being a lesbian, actually coming out and being who I am has happened since I cut off my parents because their pressure and disapproval was deterring me from actually, first of all, discovering who I was and expressing it because I was so distracted by um, their disapproval. And it wasn't allowing me to do it. So I can't imagine being trans and not feeling safe to really transition. Um, and just saying, you know, or thinking maybe it's just worth it just not to deal with it, even though it's
Yeah,
really who you are, and that's torture not to be who you are.
yeah. I mean, back to like my, where my story, I think that was really the mindset that I was in when I decided to detransition, was that I had
Oh
been
yeah, yeah.
rejected by so many of my peers, uh like partners, people that I was like really emotionally invested in, that I thought cared about
Oh
me, but my
yeah.
transness was a problem for them, and my transness was a problem for my dad. And so eventually I started to think like, maybe they're right. Maybe being trans is just like the problem, and what I need to quash, like, if it's going to be this difficult, maybe I'd rather live miserably and at least
Mm,
like have an easy life than to be open about who I am and deal with all these problems, because it's everywhere all the time. You're getting
yeah.
people saying things or making accusations against you, or like suggesting that you're trying to dominate a sport or something, and it's like
Mm,
I'm just trying to play and
just
participate
want to
within
be
community.
right. Just want to participate. So what? So you said you started to detransition, but obviously that did not. You did not stay
That did
detransitioned.
not
What kind
stick.
of good?
Yeah.
What motivated you to go ahead and move forward with being who you are fearlessly?
Yeah, so I think for me, another a part of the reason I detransitioned as well was because I was getting ready to go to college, and I was kind of think in my
Mm,
view, I saw like this path where I could bury my past and have a chance to try to be normal.
mm,
Um,
understand that.
try to like fresh start, totally start new. And I tried to do that, and I found that, and I tried really hard. I mean, I this is always the thing that gets people to laugh. I joined a fraternity. I was trying so hard to be a boy.
Did you join
Um,
the Pikes? Because they're party animals.
we were Kappa Sigma, I think.
Oh, okay, Kappa Sigma. I think they
Yeah,
had a house. Yeah,
it
they
was.
there was a big fraternity row at my school, and it had like all these big houses, and they
Oh
threw the
yeah.
best parties. So,
I mean, we did have some good parties. It was pretty fun, but also I think some bad shit happened at some of those parties. But
oh well,
um,
I mean, yeah, that's true. College.
yeah, yeah, it was a little messy here and there. But I think for me, I, so I was right around, I think, my sophomore year of college. Towards the end, where I was really struggling with my mental health. Like
Mm,
I was extremely depressed. I was, like, trigger warning for the audience. I was like extremely suicidal, and
relatable. Yeah,
was
dealt with
like
that too.
thinking plans and all that kind of stuff. It was getting pretty down to the wire for me. And the therapist who I was seeing at the time, 5150'd me. She basically said, either I can like take you there, or you can drive yourself and call me when you get there, or I'm calling an ambulance and you're gonna be
Mm.
like 5150 there. So she
Oh,
didn't
what
technically
is?
5150 is when you're hospitalized against your will because you're a danger to yourself or others.
Oh, so
Mm.
that's the name for it.
Yeah.
I've had that happen.
Yeah, it's
Not
because
because I was a danger to anyone else, but I can relate to that.
yeah, it was pretty bleak. I was in the inpatient ward for like 2 weeks or something like that. And
Oh
then
no.
luckily my best friend, who's still my best friend in the whole world, he was so awesome. Like, even my dad didn't like show up or like try to give a shit about that. My best friend was there like almost every day. He was like, "Do you need clothes? Like, what do you need? I'm gonna be there
That's
for you."
awesome.
He's so cool. He's an amazing human being. Very grateful for
Wow.
him.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, it started a situation where I think I was trying to pin a lot of. I still deal with depression, and I'm still medicated for it and all of that, but I was trying to pin all of my issues on my mental health, and
Mm,
it resulted in me getting misdiagnosed. And I was trying to get, I wasn't trying to get, I was getting prescribed all these different medications, testing them out to see
right.
if that would help me. And surprise, surprise, not all my problems are mental health. So
Right.
it was really not going well. And I went to an outpatient clinic like 3 different times in the course of about a year and a half,
Oh wow.
leading up to I took was it a whole year or just a semester? I can't remember. I took some time off of college and took a semester off and was just working. And I met my first ever boyfriend, and that was kind of a journey for me to start realizing, like, okay, I think what I'm dealing with is that I actually fucking hate myself, like my queerness. Like
Understand.
I was deeply resented the queer parts of me, and really could not cope with like the reality that I was not a straight cisgender person. Like,
Right.
I wasn't able to live up to those expectations at all. And I think just eventually, once that kind of rug got pulled out from under me, the chips started to just kind of fall into place until I realized, okay. Eventually I was telling my therapist, like, oh, I transitioned as a teenager, but it was wrong, and I was wrong, and that's not what I want to do. I maybe I'm like bisexual or whatever, but like that's the most of it. I'm not actually still trans. And then like they would kind of like press on, like, okay, well, like, why do you think that? And like, where's that coming from and stuff? And why do you think that happened or whatever? Or why did you think that was a solution for you? And the more I kind of answered those questions, I realized that it's because I was right, and I was transgender, and I just deeply resented it. And so I kind of then started, and this is like, maybe I'm coming to this realization as I'm about to finish college, pretty much. It's like I think I took like a summer semester to graduate after my fourth year. And it was right about then, I was like 22, just about to graduate college. I was like, okay, I'm trans. I'm pretty sure I'm trans. And now the journey has to be like becoming cool with it. And like for me, it was really important. I did like a lot of like feminist reading to try to like kind of like squash maybe any like internalized misogyny that I had. And
I
I
understand
also,
that.
yeah, I wanted to like get myself to a place where even if I didn't take hormones and transition, I was comfortable like putting on makeup and wearing girls' clothes and going out in public and being like,
Wow,
people
that's
can
real.
make fun of me or look at me weird or beat the shit out of me or whatever they want to do, but it's not going to make me not trans. And I had to like kind of
Get
like
straight.
force myself into that exposure therapy, you know?
Yeah.
And that was pretty effective. And then it was the November after I graduated college, I started taking hormones again, and then it's been pretty smooth sailing since then. And then I was so anal about all this stuff back then that's just when I did most of my research on like the efficacy of trans healthcare and like what are the regret
Yes.
rates and like all the I wanted to be like so knowledgeable that I would basically have no like real concerns, you know?
Excellent.
And yeah, and it was pretty effective. And I think then I just kind of learned I just had to like really just live it and you know, let myself become desensitized to the fear and the anxiety around being an openly trans person.
Wow. That is so. I don't want to make this about me, but that is so relatable. And it touches a lot on some of the concerns that I have about being an openly lesbian and
Mm-hmm.
being Black and openly lesbian because I will, I'm going to get married and have children and I'm going to be walking around this world with these things out in the open. And I have concerns about that.
Yeah.
Um, it's concerning, frankly, because I want to do all the things. I want my kids to have healthy lives, play sports, recitals, and I want us to be able to travel. And I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I went back home a couple months ago and was up in Gatlinburg, and I was just thinking, oh my God, if I had my wife and kids out here, we'd be getting so many looks because it's so Southern and Christian and conservative, and that is a concern. And I've never really thought about that the way you just put it forth, like just kind of, well, just living with it really and not always trying to fight it.
Yeah. Like something that like so I've talked on like Transatlantic, my call-in show about trans rights before about um like
That's a
so I
great
used
name, by the way. I love that name, Transatlantic.
yeah, it's perfect because Katie and I are, you know, UK and US. We were like, it works.
That's
Um,
perfect.
we yeah. So I've talked before about how like I used to go to grocery stores and sit in the parking lot and have an absolute panic attack, like complete meltdown,
Interesting.
and then I would drive home and wouldn't even go in because I was like, I need groceries, but I was terrified about how people were going to look at me. And after
Sure.
doing that enough times, I eventually kind of realized, like, you know what? Even if I am, let's say they're right and I'm actually a complete freak, I still need groceries.
Right.
Like,
This was before Instacart too, so
right. Like I deserve the opportunity if I'm not hurting anyone or
right.
imposing like who I am on other people to take up space in society. Like
Yeah.
I am born here just like everyone else. I
Yeah.
didn't choose who I am or my life. I just have it. And
Right.
so I'm not going to, you know, stop myself from going into the public space because somebody might potentially find me objectionable. Like that.
Mm,
eh,
good
and I
point.
mean it's easier to say now looking back on it, but like I really do think that had an impact, this notion of like you deserve to take up space. Like I'm not doing anything to anybody else, and so
No.
there's absolutely no reason that I should have to hide who I am. And I know this is like a really common experience because I was in trans support groups back in the day, and when I finally kind of got over my fear, a bunch of the other people in the group would talk about like, oh, you know, I can't even go out, I can't even do this. I'm like terrified to like wear clothes that make me feel good out in public. And it was
Yes.
like it was really cool because back then, like a bunch of us, we'd all get together. We'd be like, no, you're gonna go out with us. And if people have shit to say to you, there's gonna be a crowd of 5 people around you, so they're gonna be fucking terrified.
Love
Uh,
it.
yeah, it was. I love that queer people have like, and trans people in particular have really like a solid sense of protecting our own.
Good.
Knowing what it's like to go through this society as a queer kid and to deny yourself of being who you are and feeling like you have to beat it down and just how complete utter bullshit that is.
Mm.
um I definitely think I have felt more family from random queer people like walking
Oh
down the
yeah.
street than half of my family, like my
Yeah.
biological family ever. Yeah.
That's definitely relatable. I've built a community myself with some lesbians here in Atlanta, and they've been more supportive and loyal than a lot of my family. So
Mhm.
that's definitely understandable. Well, we are moving towards the end of the podcast, but I did have one question I was curious about.
Sure.
Um, have you thought about like having a family, like the kids in the picket
Mm.
fence and all of that? Like, where do you kind of want in that area?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm sure the audience knows my boyfriend is Matt Dillahunty, and I think he's kind of at a stage in his life where I don't know if he's as interested in a family, but he knows that I've always really, really wanted a family. Like I cannot wait to be a mom.
Yeah, same,
It's
but not. I'm not birthing any kids. I just would love to have a
yeah,
family.
yeah, and like it doesn't need to be right away. I mean, I'm 27. I'm still
Oh, you're
have
young.
like a little bit of runway here.
Yeah,
And we're like I'm building up a business and stuff right now, and that's kind of got more of my focus. But yeah, I definitely want a family and kids. That is like extremely important to me. That's always been something I've wanted. Always,
same.
always.
Yeah, awesome.
Mhm.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that develop over the next, little bit of time and seeing how you guys get your business up and running and how you grow your family because you're growing your family all the time with the
Oh
pets.
yeah, we are. I've got
Those
my little baby Euro right here. He's basking in the sunlight, trying to soak up some sweet rays. So
lovely, lovely. Well, I'm actually really curious to see what other pets you guys get down the road too. Because when I look at your Twitter, I'm just like you guys are more effective at keeping pets than Noah was in the Bible. So
well, true because we actually exist. So
that's true. Very true. Well, Arden, thank you so much for joining me today. I have so many more questions. Of course, I can't keep you forever, but if possible, I'd love to have you back on the show again.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much,
Great.
Nikki. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for watching Beat the Cult. We're going to wrap up. Arden, if you don't mind, just kind of letting people know where we can find you, your social media, your podcast.
Yeah, you can find me at the Arden Hart everywhere on Insta, TikTok, and Twitter. I am posting on all those pretty regularly. And if you go to the line on YouTube every Thursdays at 2 p.m. Central Time, although we do change the time from time to time because we have guests and it's difficult coordinating all these schedules, but usually 2 p.m. Central Time on Thursdays is Transatlantic.
Awesome. All right, thank you. And thanks everyone for watching. Of course, you can find Beat the Cult on YouTube at Beat the Cult and Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram as well, even though I don't really use the latter two there, at Beat the Cult. I know I need to get back on Instagram and Twitter, well, TikTok, but Twitter takes up like all my time. But
I get it. That's also my primary addiction.
exactly. And I'm hoping it doesn't get driven into the ground because I'm way too lazy to learn how to use Mastodon.
Yeah,
So
same.
but anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Keep an eye out for podcasts coming up down the road. Actually, our next podcast I'm going to be having on Damien Adho. So that will be next Monday at 8 p.m. Same time as today. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.